Friday, according to the Most Reverend Pastor Lee, was the dawn of the actual Sabbath day or day of worship, the traditional churchy day, Sunday, being some heretical pagan bullshit, not his words. The tabernacle was obligated to hold service on the real Sabbath. To Jesse, though, Friday was just the gate of the weekend and general foolery. But time is, if nothing else, the greatest of thieves never caught, and the days of unbridled weekend fun between Jesse and his longtime associates was coming to a close, and the hungry beast of responsibilities was out for blood and sweat. Jesse's phone threw a tantrum of notification beeps, stirring him awake. Lying face up, mouth hung open on his somewhat inflated air mattress, he rubbed his tired eyes. The text read, "You up?" It was Troy, Jesse's buddy. Strangely, quite early for him. "Yeah," Jesse replied. "Troy, shit is stupid. Meet me outside, 'kay?" "'Kay." Troy's grumbling sedan was waiting outside in the parking lot, already his front end nearly having eaten the pile of garbage bags full of Jesse's things still sitting there from yesterday, collecting dew. "Spring cleanup?" Troy shouted from the ether of cigarette smoke in his car. "Dude," Jesse smacked his lips, rolling his eyes, and he hustled down to greet his pal in some sweatpants and a tossed-on hoodie. "They ain't hauling no more, you know that, right?" "I know a trash guy, he said so," Troy said, handing Jesse a lighter. "So what's up?" Jesse nestled in the frigid leather seat. "You hear about this, fellowship and Garfunkel shit?" asked Troy. "Yeah, you mean the tabernacle?" "Yeah. Sounds like they're offering up a pretty sweet deal for the summer. Ma thinks I should go," said Troy. "Dude, you don't even believe in God," Jesse laughed. "Open your eyes to the light, man. Ask and you shall receive." Troy took a long drag off of his smoke, lifting his head in a sarcastic praise. "It's kind of weird, though. Mom was just talking to me about coming, too." "No shit." "Yeah, I heard they're offering PRCC credits, probably convertible to Central, too. And 'cause I've had a little experience in the excavating business, my old man said it'd be a good gig," Troy explained. "But what is this job exactly? Excavating?" "It's basically this, Troy said, project the Jesus Camp wants to take on. But the pastor says he don't want to involve, say, Pop's business because, Uncle Sam. So I guess it's just some giant project the church folks are financing," Troy went on. "So they're more or less trying to slip under the radar, if you know what I mean." "I was going to say," Jesse dropped his lips, "Vitali's is like the biggest business for that around here." "Yeah, Pops, he works with a couple guys who go there. They're really into it," Troy said. "Yeah, seems like you'd have to be." "So you're going today?" asked Troy. "Well, I promised Mom I'd go with her to the service and check it out. Stymax ain't paying shit, so." "Yeah, they're starting up the registration for the program. I'm supposed to go too." Troy had a smug look on his face. "Dude," Jesse's face peeled into a grin. "You're going to church, bro." "Cash money, motherfucker," exclaimed Troy, smacking his hands together. "They say that's the real God anyway, huh?" Troy's enthusiasm helped to carry along the notion that the tabernacle might not be a total waste of time for Jesse. Bringing home some giant piles of untaxed community service holy money, maybe to blow on their own fleeting worldly devices like pop, alcohol, weed, or the casino, started to sound less and less bad in spite of the cross to bear. The tabernacle also offered a generous range of accredited programs and transferable college credits in an attempt to entice would-be newcomers of younger age groups, either for work or for study. The church's proselytizing campaigns, oddly, were less locally known than nationally and even internationally known. drawing in hundreds of people of fresh blood for every season. Troy as a friend seemed ever the opened window of relief from which Jesse could leap during the troubled times throughout his young life. "Jesse!" Jen was shouting, Jesse's mom, and waving from the open front door of the townhouse with a cell phone stuck to her face. "Yeah?" Troy poked his head out of Troy's car window. She began gesturing at the phone. "Looks like Mama wants you," said Troy, shifting the gear shaft. "So see you there?" Jesse asked. "Hell yeah, man, I'll be there. They got free food and shit." "Honey," Jesse's mom had already made her way down the walk. A loud voice could be heard on the other end of her cell phone, spitting strings of uninterrupted dialogue as she planted herself nearer Troy's sedan. "It's Aunt Tricia. She wants you to come by for some cleaning up before the service." Jen held the phone lower, covering the microphone with her hand. "Hi, Mama Bird," Troy mockingly said from inside the car, leaning over. Jen dipped the phone to her neck, rolling her eyes. "Honey, she's in one of her moods." "Oh, hi, Troy." She smiled. "Oh, hell, Jess," Troy announced. "I'll just run you there." Jesse and Troy pulled into Aunt Tricia's crushed limestone driveway, which ended up about 50 yards before spilling into a broad parking space in the midst of some hardy wooded acreage. A particular northern spruce had always stood guard just before the driveway made its slight bend to the closest near the rear entrance. One of its branches hung uncut and low, and would notoriously glide across the windshield of any incoming visitor's vehicles. Aunt Tricia had always claimed that she, quote, didn't have permission to trim, quote, him, and so left the limb be, in all its sap-ridden glory, to hang and to smear everything. Her Tudor-style cottage was like something cut from a German children's book. Cats owned this place. Aunt Tricia just happened to live there. Most of the 7 or so feral ones liked to perch themselves up along her wooden entryway steps leading to the screen door, expectedly waiting to be showered in cat kibble daily before scattering amongst the bushes whenever a vehicle or the delivery driver approached too close. Trying to speak above the wheels of the car chewing the gravel as Troy skirted away, Jesse shouted, "Aunt Tricia!" Just the noise of some not-so-distant wind chimes bounced along the air when Jesse heard a woman's voice while stooping to pet a nameless cat rubbing against his leg. "Ouch! God damn it!" The woman's voice was frustrated. There was something thrashing around behind one of Trish's sheds. As soon as Jesse approached, announcing himself, he saw his great-aunt busy using a garden hoe to whip down a thorny assortment of weeds and thistles, cursing to high heaven. "Hey, Aunt Tricia, what are you doing?" Jesse asked from behind her. "Oh, honey, hi. It's so good to see you, dear." She used the wrist of one of her gardening gloves to push up her sun cap and then readjusted her overall strap. "I was just talking with your mother. These damn things are invading from the woods, and they've strangled my beautiful black-eyed Susans before they can even come up. I'm trying to snap these suckers." She gives another smack to the thick monstrosity of tangled vines out of spite. Here, Jesse stepped forward, offering his hand. No, she brushed away. "Here, let's get you some fresh lemonade first. I'm thirsty anyway, been out here damn near an hour," she said, chucking her tool against the side of the shed. The chorus of meows intensified as the two approached the house. Jesse nearly tripped on what looked like some kind of garden ornament in the form of a concrete crocodile lying in the mulch of one of Aunt Tricia's garden beds. "Where's my Whittle Wubbles? Where'd he go?" Aunt Tricia squeezed her voice, stroking one of the tabby cats with its butt in the air, perched on the handrail of her back sunroom. She practically lived in a greenhouse. Ivy of every variety stretched all across every corner of her kitchen. There was an assortment of cat toys strewn across the floor. The sneaking haze of incense sticks spared the nostrils the torment of nearly as many scattered litter boxes as feeding bowls. She had a running water fountain in her dining area, surrounded by a series of large to small selenite, quote, singing bowls. And Himalayan-themed throne blankets hung throughout her living room in vibrant colors and design in written Sanskrit. Tibetan prayer flags of every color were strung across the entry of almost every doorway inside, along with blue glass ornaments of the evil eye everywhere you'd look. The noise of her flat-screen TV was stuck on some home improvement channel and echoed against the shiny paneling of her hardwood floors as she handed Jessie a glass of pulp or juice. Tricia slammed her fridge door full of organic tofu bricks, home-brewed cold coffee, and kombucha tea and sighed. "Let's sit, dear," she said. After a minute reclining onto some teak wood furniture on her sun porch, Aunt Tricia finally spoke. "So, I hear you've made a new friend at work." "I mean, not really. I know a guy," Jesse shrugged after another polite sip of his drink. "Well, that's nice." Jesse knew Aunt Tricia hadn't called his mom to have him come over for work. She had this habit of creating dilemmas as a pretext for the real reason she'd ever summon anyone over: gossip. It wouldn't be but a few minutes into their usual visits and pleasantries before she'd inevitably spill the beans and drop the proverbial tea. "So," went Aunt Tricia, tucking her face into her cup, "what do you think about this church your mother is having you go to?" Jessie glanced around the room for words, taking in the lulling rotation of the white ceiling fan above. "It's weird, I guess," he said. "Why do you ask? Is there something weird?" Aunt Tricia almost croaked. "Do you really want to go?" "But at this point, I don't feel like I have much of a choice. Rob's being a dick, and my time is running out over there. I have to get my own place, and quick." "Well, honey, you know I'd let you stay here, but there's just not a lot of room, and sorry, honey, but frankly, since Dan left, I can't imagine having another man around here all the time. I'd probably be driven to look for the old rope, but no offense, dear." No, I know. But your mother having you go to this church is not good, in my opinion." "Why?" Jessie threw up a hand. "It's just some church." "Honey, that place is just a bad influence. I would know. I practically grew up there." "Wait, really?" This was news. Aunt Tricia would have been the last person Jessie would have imagined being religious, at least in the sense of the word that he knew. "Do you want to listen to some ancient history?" Aunt Tricia chuckled. Jessie shrugged, contorting his face, again on the account of the bitter pulp drink. Tricia went on. "I knew Adam Lee's father, or Pastor Lee, that is. His dad was my pastor when I was young, if you can believe I was ever young," began recounting Tricia. "Wait," Jessie interrupted. "Who's Adam Lee?" "He's the bigwig now, dear." "Oh, you mean Pastor Lee. Yeah, duh. Sorry. Anyway, Lee Sr., Adam's father, was the pastor when I was there. This was way back before the tabernacle got popular around here." "Uh-huh," Jessie said. "Honey, I'm telling you, the bottom line is they're quacks." "Well, yeah, but if it means I can get the hell out of my mom's place," Jessie said. "Why not shack up with your friend Troy?" Aunt Tricia suggested. "That's what we're working on, believe me. Troy's gonna work at this place too, this church, actually." Tricia nearly spat up her lemonade. "Troy's going there?" she rattled with hilarity. "Yeah," laughed Jessie. Tricia recollected herself. "Anyway, I know it's hard, honey. I've told your mom to divorce that son of a bitch for a while." "It's whatever. I've just had it. And if it means dealing with some weird church for a couple weeks, then so be it, Troy was telling me they're going to pay pretty well, too, so Jessie said. Aunt Tricia nodded, clenching her lips. Well, they could certainly afford to. Are they rich? Honey, Aunt Tricia smirked, they own half the county. Can you imagine what they get from donations alone, all tax-free? She continued. They're rolling in it like a hot tub over there. Some wind chimes outside of the porch began to clamor in the breeze. And they're only going to get bigger once they acquire Luke's, Aunt Tricia continued. Yeah, Jessie snapped. What's up with that? Do you know why the church is building on Luke's? Why would they want that place? Tricia made a devious smirk. That's the ancient history part. Tricia was a glutton, or a sucker, depending on who you'd ask, for the mysterious or the cryptic or the macabre. Bigfoot, aliens, conspiracy theories of all sorts. She'd sometimes spin in her conclusions such a web of whichever stories she'd read online in her sort of precarious grasp of the internet, it would be hard to keep track. Ever since she'd gotten a new tablet from her daughter, she spent hours glued to it, browsing the world of articles, news stories, streaming channels, and talk shows. She wasn't stupid or gullible by any stretch, just endlessly fascinated with the strange, the odd, and the paranormal. Jessie sunk into his chair, anticipating a long story. Aunt Tricia began with a sigh. What we know as Luke's Wood is actually ancient indigenous land, she began, leaning in. They say the Potawatomi around here kept the woods sacred for generations. Yeah? Said Jessie. Story goes, honey, sometime in the 1600s, Frenchmen wound up here led by a zealous priest named Lucas Dupuy. They were mostly surveying for the fur trade, and of course for converts, but the priest had other ideas. Jessie nodded. The legend says Dupuy was obsessed with finding the fountain of youth, claiming he'd read allusions to it in the Bible here to be found in the so-called New World. A spring or lake which supposedly held the waters of eternal life. Jessie laughed. In that dump? Honey, believe me, the white man ruined everything around here. This used to be such beautiful land. Uh-huh, Jessie said. Anyway, the expedition group Dupuy led began to get impatient with him and thought he was going crazy. The church back home, which financed his expedition, was growing irritated too, after months and months of finding nothing. That is, until they ran into some locals who claimed a spring like that did exist, and it was in this area of Michigan. Many of the indigenous people had referred to the spring as Kokone since time immemorial. What? Jessie feigned interest. Yup, there'd been rumors floating around. Some of the fur traders circles that there was a group of natives who appeared as if they'd never aged, and it was said even their chief was young and abnormally strong, for being hundreds of years old, that is. At some point, some of the indigenous folk agreed to show the French where the spring was, so they sent a young man with Dupuy and his crew to lead them to it, and that's where things got strange. Right, Jessie said. They say the French and the Indians got into some altercation when they finally reached the spring and they never came back. Huh, Jessie grunted. So that's why it's called Luke's? Yup, Aunt Tricia confirmed. So, Kokone, that's the spring youth thing? Jessie asked. Yes, replied Tricia. It's a corrupted native word meaning something like alligator or crocodile. As a matter of fact, Port Ridge itself was originally named something like Kokane for that reason. Jessie sat on the story for a minute. So, the spring is gone, though. It dried up, or how come no one's found it? That's what some folks were wondering, or how they'd even know that this was the area Dupuy and his crew ended up. Truth is, I don't know, dear. Some speculate that after the Mad Monk and his crew arrived, a local shaman laid a curse on the spring so as to make it hidden where no one could find it again. Jesse sat and thought. So that's why this church is developing the land? To look for the spring? Aunt Tricia fixed her gaze on Jesse and slurped some of her pulp. Jesse's head fell back. Come on, Aunt Tricia. I'm telling you, Jay, I think they're up to something there. Do you really believe that crap? Hey, Tricia threw up her forearms. It wouldn't be the first time some treasure seekers came around these parts. Supposedly even some Mormons made it up here after old Joe Smith settled down in Kirtland, probably looking for the spring too. It's much more likely, though, the tabernacle is just doing what they've done for the past 25 years or so, and gobbling up all the land they can get their grubby little hands on. A lot of money to be had in tourism too, you know. Well, Jesse said, if I end up finding a spring of life or whatever, I'll be sure to get some into a bucket for you. Tricia laughed. I wouldn't get your hopes up, dear. But in all seriousness, honey, be careful out there if you decide to do it. The tabernacle, frankly, gives me the creeps. I will, affirmed Jesse. But why do you end up leaving the church anyway? Aunt Tricia lost her eyes in the window for a moment. It's a long story, and it's been years, honey. But anyway, your mom is coming by shortly. We're all going to go up to the service together. Oh, you're coming too? I figured I'd keep an eye on little Gally while y'all soaked it in, just to make sure she doesn't get herself into any trouble. You know how kids are. Tricia got up. Here, let me show you the stuff I wanted you to do for me before your mom gets here. Not long passed, and Jesse heard the wheels of Jen's Suburban pull up from behind the shed where he'd been thrashing the wicked mess of invasive vines pouring in from the woods. Galilee was tucked in her car seat, bouncing with anticipation as the crew piled in. Jesse was handed a bag of dried organic bananas to dispense to the child intermittently along the way, most winding up on the floor. And a drive it was. The Fellowship Tabernacle owned a teeming acreage stretching for miles of forest and meadows in every direction in the county, hugging the shores of Lake Michigan. This blob of real estate had swallowed up so much of the undeveloped woodland area hugging the city of Port Ridge proper. One could be forgiven, though surely wouldn't be, for not even realizing they were in the midst of church property, in spite of years-long efforts by the county to put up signs, unable to keep up with the toppling acquisitions of the church and the fellowship's burgeoning budget. Over the decades since its founding, the Fellowship Tabernacle had gone from what amounted to a potluck hub for some gospel-hungry locals into a massive complex, expanding far beyond its initial boundaries and humble meeting house, which now lay a dormant wooden relic somewhere in the property. Approaching the tabernacle felt like going to an amusement park. Greeted by large banners hanging over a sea of asphalt, approaching the main building, one of the many, quote, on campus, as they'd call it, the road traffic abruptly intensified as the Suburban drew closer, and all the disparate roads leading to the center converged like a spider's web. The sheer volume of vehicles gave off the impression of some great concert, and this, Jesse thought to himself, was just the weekly service. Officials of the church, dressed uniformly in varying shades of orange tees, meticulously directed the flow of cars along a landscape of roadside cones, and they were draped in safety vests resembling those of airport controllers. Straight ahead sat a building which could have put even the most ambitious gymnasium to shame. There were giant shaded windows reaching out from the bottom of a brick-faced canopy, and featured in the middle of the pea-stone moat walkway was a gurgling mosaic fountain, greeting the massive herd of incoming customers, or visitors. Jen and Aunt Tricia made a fuss about the traffic directors as they did their best to navigate through the chaos. The painted smiles of the officials led them down row after row of parked vehicles. Aunt Tricia repeatedly teased Jen about being careful not to run one of the volunteers over, elbowing her softly from the passenger seat and cackling to herself. After a while of creeping along, they finally snuck into a spot. Gally was by this time fed up with the little kids program streamed from online through a depleting service connection Jessie had been holding up for her along the ride on Tricia's tablet. She squirmed to be released from her car seat, captured by all the commotion and bright colors outside, tracing her little fingers along smudges on the window surface. The rushing noise of the great fountain became louder as the bunch drew closer to the building, at last on foot, guided along by a marked-out path of road cones.